Hello, it's Richard Pearce from FinextraTV. Today I'm delighted to be joined by David Greig of the TNFD. We're going to talk about asking better questions on nature for board directors, a guide that's been created in conjunction with Chapter Zero, Competent Board, and a number of others. David, as well as being co-chair of the TNFD, former CEO of Refinitiv, of course, he chairs the investment committee of Triple Private Equity. Welcome, David.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
You're a busy man, lots of things going on there. Tell us, who is the guide created for, and what do you hope to achieve by creating it?
Thanks. The guide is for board directors. The reason that we created it was we realized that a lot of board directors are appreciating that nature risk is becoming a material issue, either for the company or the investor that they're representing on their board, that often they don't yet have the knowledge or confidence to approach the topic with their management teams, but they recognize that it's important. It's becoming part of their duty, frankly, to address all risks, and also to help build a common language system. Language is important. We need to speak about the right things in the right way and communicate with our executive teams and have them address them. So really it's come about as a very, very powerful and useful tool, because directors are now recognizing the need to address this, but they also want training, confidence, and a language system in which they can talk to their management teams on how to address the issue.
Mm. And so I was reading it last night. There's 12 questions, I believe. And so, what sort of analysis and outcome do you hope to provoke by taking people through these questions?
Yeah, I mean, the first question is, well, how and where does our business depend on and impact nature? Nature is highly location specific. It's contextualized in the environment that you're in, how much water you might be using, or your dependency on fertile soils or other provisioning services, or the impacts that you could be having on nature are location specific. So the first question that board directors need to ask their teams is, have you done the work to understand where we are based and where we're located and where our supply chain and providers are located, and do we understand the nature impacts and dependencies that we might have in those areas? So, what assessment comes from that? Well, a lot of companies might know where they are, but they don't exactly know where they are. And if I explain that, they may know that they have a legal entity or they have an operation in a certain region, but what this encourages them to do is to use the LEAP framework, which is part of TNFD, locate, evaluate, assess, and prepare, to go through their business operations and understand where the most significant locations are in terms of dependencies and impacts on nature. So as you can see, the very first question, simple question, that a board member will ask, will then expect, well, okay, I need to understand from my management team their location specificity. Do they understand where the supply chain is? Do they understand the dependencies that I might have on ecosystem services that could be both negative or positive? And which ones of those are most material, and how do I prioritize those? So those are the types of things that these questions lead you to start doing.
Got you. And you're partnered obviously with the Green Finance Institute,
Yeah.
Chapter Zero, and others. How did you sort of come down to these 12 questions as being the ones that you felt were the most appropriate for what you're trying to achieve, and also knowing the boards as Chapter Zero do?
Yeah, well, 12 is a nice number. We didn't want too many and not too few. We actually got a lot of input from competent boards, from Chapter Zero and from Green Finance Institute on, as they talk to board members and directors, these were the things that were coming up as the questions that they had. But also we engineered it back from the TNFD approach to guide board members to steer their management teams in the right direction as well. Like, what are your dependencies and impacts on nature? What types of risks, excuse me, do you have? What is the interplay with climate and nature? A very popular question is, lots of companies have done climate-related risk, but what's the relationship and how do I approach nature-related risk? Are they different? Are they the same? Where's the overlap? So really it was about sort of getting feedback from the market, understanding the TNFD approach, using the advantages that we have. We've got now over 230 or something reports in the public domain. So we're getting a lot of information now back from companies who are doing this to help board directors build that language system, build the confidence to ask the management teams the right questions. These 12 were seen as covering most of the bases, all of the bases that we felt were important as part of the TNFD approach.
Fabulous. And I mean, that sort of leads me on now, as you've got TNFD, starting to sort of rock and roll, as it were. What sort of insights are you finding coming back, that boards are starting to, I don't know, establish? You can see patterns and maybe some useful insights which are coming through that are, things you can repeat and tell others they might get the advantage of.
Yeah, there's some very interesting learnings coming back. It's quite early days, but we've got now, several months where we are into triple figures of reporting. University of Lancaster actually did a study of 100 reports. We've got more than that in the domain now to look at. A couple of patterns that do come out: very high disclosure of location-based assessments and also dependencies and impacts. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that actually people are recognizing that there are risks and they are material. They are recognizing that they have to do the work on location specificity, because that's what can determine whether they're real or not, or whether material. You can't just do a broad brush. So I think there's some kind of interesting findings from where people are disclosing. If you also look at the sector-based analysis of some of the investors too, interesting sectors coming up as high risk. Technology. Sometimes we think about nature risk as just impacting agriculture or textiles, food production, other areas, but technology is coming up as a major sector. We're now working on our technology guidance for this, and that's because the manufacturer of the technology equipment uses a lot of industrial processes with heavy dependencies on resources like water. The data centers themselves have high footprint, high land use change, which is one of the biggest issues we have with nature, but also use a lot of water. And then, of course, with a shortened life cycle of technology componentry, the recycling or waste that those create and the pollutants and others. So just with one sector, people are starting to realize that actually the risks are a little bit different from they thought. They're not just the purview of agriculture or some of the traditional processes that we associate with nature. They are finding too that the risks are often more immediate than climate risk, actually. Look at the situation we have in Europe now and the UK with water shortages and other areas. So this is not something that is years away. This is something that's happening now. And they're also finding that actually physical risk in climate and nature are integrated. They're often one is causing the other. So they are finding that actually they should deal with them together. In fact, I think it's a good third of the reports that are in the public domain have integrated nature and climate together, which I think is an interesting sign of the efficiencies and the approach of putting those two on the table at the same time.
Yeah, excellent. And I remember listening to a webinar where a pharmaceutical company was talking about, how their perception was they had no real exposure to carbon, and then they realized they work a lot with farming cattle to relate to some blood products.
Yeah.
And then they actually had to go and treat the methane emissions from the cattle as a result of it. They didn't have a clue that was actually on their radar until they did TNFD, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
So listen, you've been going 4 years. You've obviously done the mobilization. You've spoken about the rollout and so forth. What's next for TNFD?
Well, we're sort of in getting towards the end of the middle phase. We always said there were 3 phases to this. There was a design phase. There was an adoption and engagement and capacity building phase, and then there's an integration phase. Now, they're not perfectly unique. We're still doing design work. In fact, we just released our technical guidance on ocean, marine transport, fishery. We're working on the technology sector as guidance, as well as the sustainable fuels sector as well. So some very interesting work that's going on the technical level. But we're in this phase now where we're helping companies and financial institutions build capacity. We've got training partners that are out there that we've develop training capabilities that they can go out and roll out training around the world. I mean, this is something that we have to deal with globally around there. We're working on building the capacity for nature data, a very popular topic. We've been working with a data catalyst that we set up for literally for 4 years since we started. We made our recommendations on how do we improve the nature data value chain. We're piloting a set of nature data principles at the moment as well. So there's a lot of work that we're doing around capacity building. But then as we go into the next phase, what we really need to do is then build the TNFD approach, the recommendations, the metrics, into global regulatory standards. We're not a standards body. We're an industry task force. We're here to assess requirements, build and develop and design, and then make recommendations that are then tested and piloted in the market. Our aspiration is that the global regulatory bodies and national regulators, so the EU with what they're doing now with CSRD, ISSB and their global baseline, incorporate the TNFD recommendations into the national and international standards and regulatory standards that are out there. So we're sort of entering into that phase, but we still got a lot of work to do. We obviously have fantastic adoption around the world, both companies and financial institutions that are telling everyone they're adopting. And for every one of those, there's probably 2 or 3 that are actually just doing the work as well, which is fine. So we're making good progress, but there's plenty of work to do. And of course, time is not on our side as we see some of the immediate issues that we're having in our natural system and the climate system as we see it today.
Indeed, indeed. Well, David, thank you so much for bringing us up to date on the guide and obviously what's happening with TNFD. We thank you for that, and hopefully we'll keep in touch and you'll keep us updated on the next milestones and progress. But for now, David, Craig, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Richard.